Anything else from the state?
Not this time, Your Honor.
Anything else from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Have y'all looked at the jury instructions at all?
I believe Mr. Evans glanced at them, Your Honor, and I glanced at them, but not anything definitive.
We've only looked at the, Mr. Cummings has looked
I
at.
beg your pardon?
Mr. Cummings has looked only at the death penalty stuff. I haven't had a chance to look at the guilt phase instructions.
Yeah, we need to look at that pretty soon. Guess always an issue as to what lessers people are seeking, need to resolve that. But the only other issue of maybe a little bit of a confusing is the state is seeking a felony murder theory based upon the other homicides. I assume, what is your theory on that? Let me hear your theory on that.
Your Honor, the theory would be as to the felony murder would be really more towards the purposes of the children, and the fact that Mr. Segura committed the murder against Mrs. Peters during the course of committing that murder, then killed the children for essentially lack of witnesses.
Well, that was my assumption, but I decided I'd better let you articulate it before I announce that's what I assumed the state was doing. So homicide is one of the designated offenses under the felony murder statute. We weren't 100% clear on that the other day, but it is one of the offenses. If the state, if we pursue that theory, and so there are interlocking counts. I've attempted to draft an instruction similar to the standard, but it's a little bit of a twist on the standard. But it would include first-degree murder or second-degree murder. So y'all need to look at that. Frankly, I can't find any cases where homicide was the underlying felony for a felony murder. I haven't looked extensively, but I looked a fair amount. I can't find any case where that's been done. There are a number of cases that, there was some confusion at one point in time that the underlying felony was a lesser included offense, and double jeopardy prevented convictions as to both. But I think the Supreme Court pretty clearly sorted that out, and so that's not an issue. But it is something we need to look at because it's a little bit novel in terms of legal issues. That's the only other issue I see in there that has much significance. So probably, if y'all would tonight, let's look at that so we can have some discussion about that early on, so we can know where we stand on that. Anything else from either side?
No, not this time.
I think we were short a couple of jurors having a problem with parking this morning. I guess we have the grand jury here, we have regular jury selection, and we have our jurors, so that they weren't here early enough, they didn't get a parking spot, so we're waiting for a couple. As soon as we have all the jurors, we'll start. All right. All right, everybody be seated, please. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry, apparently we had a little problem with parking this morning. We'll have designated parking spots for you by this afternoon, so we'll provide that to you. But everybody needs to work on being here in a timely fashion. We start going 15, 20 minutes every time we take a break, and we're not going to get this trial done in the time we've allotted. Then I'm going to be hearing complaints from y'all. But that's just what's going to happen. So we need to be a little more vigilant about not trying to see how close we can come to the exact time, and we need to get it started on time. Anybody been exposed something that they need to discuss with me from over the weekend? All right, if you'd face the clerk and be sworn, please, ma'am.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jurors?
Yep, my name is Rebecca Cuevas.
Okay. And did you, I believe that's a married name?
It is.
And what was your previous, what was your prior name?
My previous last name was Blizzard.
Okay. And it's my understanding you used to work for Tallahassee Police Department?
I did.
Did you work for Tallahassee Police Department back in November of 2010?
I did.
Okay. And with the Tallahassee Police Department, what was your duties?
My official title was a forensic specialist 2, which basically means that I went to crime scenes, collected evidence, documented, processed evidence, and then I was also specialized in fingerprints, so I compared fingerprints as well.
Okay. And how long were you with the Tallahassee Police Department in that capacity?
I started working there in 2008, and I believe I worked up until 2011 full-time, and then I believe I fully resigned in about 2015.
Okay. And did you hold the same position throughout the course of your employment with Tallahassee Police Department?
In the beginning, I was just a forensic specialist, so I did not do fingerprint comparison, and I couldn't tell you what the date was when I actually started doing that position.
Okay. In order to do the forensic specialist where you're collecting evidence, did you undergo any kind of training or classes that showed you how to do that properly?
Yes, before I worked at TPD, I also worked at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, so in the fingerprint section there, so I got extensive training there, and then also on-the-job training at the Tallahassee Police Department.
Okay. And in your duties there at the Tallahassee Police Department, did you have an occasion to go out on November 26, 2010?
I did.
And be involved in a homicide involving Randy Peters?
Yes.
Okay. And how is it that you become involved in an investigation like this?
Typically, we get dispatched to locations from investigators.
Okay. And was that what happened back on November 26, 2010?
Yes, it was.
And where was it you were dispatched to?
I was dispatched to Jack McLean Park.
Where is Jack McLean Park?
It's on Paul Russell Road. I'm not sure the exact number, but
Okay. Out there towards the fairgrounds and all that?
yes, yes,
Okay. And you were called to Jack McLean Park to collect evidence?
I was.
And when you arrived at Jack McLean Park, when you're processing Jack McLean Park, how do you go about processing a scene such as that?
Typically, the investigators kind of know where things are, but I basically photograph the whole area, but sometimes video, and then depending on what we see, we put out little markers that we think might be of evidentiary value, and then photograph those, and then go about collecting the evidence.
Okay. Whenever you first arrived, do you talk to law enforcement or investigators and they kind of give you an idea and overview of what you're doing there?
Yes.
And did you, in fact, when you processed this scene, did you go in and take those overall photographs and then, I guess, closer up as you locate certain items?
I did.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm showing some previously marked for identification purposes, state composite 117, photograph A through L. Without showing those to the jury yet, please take a look at those.
They are in evidence, Mr. Duke.
Okay, there were some questions about whether we had actually done that at one point, so I wasn't sure.
117, A through L were admitted.
Okay, thank you. Does accurately depict the scene that you responded to there at Jack McLean Park
Yes, it does.
and the photographs and evidence that you collected?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission of public sent throughout the course of testimony?
You may.
You can dim the light just a little bit, please, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Huevos, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What are we looking at here? This photograph A.
That was one of the bathhouse, that was at Jack McLean Park.
Okay. Is this one of the areas that you process and look for items of evidence?
Yes, it was.
What are we looking at, photograph B?
That is a picture of, there was like a little pavilion that had picnic tables. I believe it was kind of adjacent to that bathhouse.
I see these little yellow tag things here. What are we looking at there? What are those?
Those are the evidence markers, so we typically put those out so you can actually see where evidence is when you're taking overall photos.
Okay, so what we're looking at in this particular situation is after you've already kind of identified certain areas of interest?
Correct.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Showing some previously marked for identification purposes as States Exhibit 118C, D, E, F, and also 118M. Actually, take a look at those items, please. Do you recognize those items?
I do.
Okay. What do those items appear to be?
These were items that were marked on that photograph there, but they were like clothing tags.
Okay. And whenever you respond to this location, you've marked these items, how do you go about actually collecting these pieces of evidence?
Specifically, we, like I said, we'll mark it and photograph them, and then we'll obviously put on gloves, and in between each piece, like picking up each piece of evidence, we'll change our gloves out.
Okay. And do you package them a certain way to make sure that they're safeguarded?
Yes, they will go in their own individual envelope or bag.
Okay. And the envelopes you see there in the items before you, is that the envelope that you would have packaged those items in?
It is.
Do you mark them in some way to show that you were the one that was collecting them and that what the item contained in each one is?
Yes, I'll write a description of it, what the number was, like item number 1, and then I also initial.
Okay. And did you do so in this particular case conform to those?
I did.
Okay. Your Honor, this time I'd move State's Composite 118, make sure I get the right numbers. C, D, E, F, as well as M in evidence, please.
C, D, E, F, and
M as in Michael.
so
That's an
I
hour.
noticed it said we'd already admitted 118A through just A.
Yes, sir. Okay.
All right, any objection? No, Your Honor. All right, they'll be admitted.
All right, thank you. Photograph C. What are we looking at here?
That's the same pavilion, it's just a different angle. But again, the evidence markers where these pieces of evidence were found.
Okay. Photograph D.
That's a close-up of item number 1, and it was a close tag.
Is that the item that's contained in State's Exhibit 118C?
Yes.
Photograph E?
Again, that's item number 1, and it's just a closer-up picture of the close tag.
What are we looking at with photograph F?
That is, again, the pavilion with the picnic tables and just a different angle of the items that were marked on the ground there.
Okay. Now, is item number 1 in this picture, or is this going to be additional items in addition, of other than item 1?
It looks like it's additional.
Okay. Okay. What's in this photograph?
That would be item number 2, and it was also close tags.
Okay. And is that the item that's contained in 118D?
Yes, it is.
Photograph number H? Could
That-
it be item number 3?
It is.
And is that the item that's contained in 118E?
Yes, it is.
Mhm. Photograph J?
That was item number 5, and it was a little piece of some kind of tag.
Skip number 4. And is that the one that's contained in 118M?
Yes, it is.
Unfortunately, I skipped over. Photograph I.
That's item number 4, and again, a little piece of tag from,
Okay. And is that the item that's contained in 118F?
yes.
Now going back to photograph A, there appears to be a trash can in front of that restroom area. Did you process that or look for that items in that particular trash can?
I believe I did.
Showing you photograph K. Is that trash can?
Yes, it is.
And photograph L. Kind of a closer up.
Yes, that would be a closer up picture of that trash can.
That T-shirt, was that seized as evidence?
It was.
Showing some previously introduced into evidence as a 118A. Actually, take a look at this, please.
Did you want me to take it out?
You don't have to take it out.
Okay.
You can just look inside and identify
Okay.
it. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And is that the same item that's depicted in this photograph?
It is.
And is it in the same or substantially same condition it was whenever you seized it?
It appears to be, yes.
You're on permission to publish the previously introduced piece of evidence.
Gonna show it to them.
I am. Now, as it relates to A, I noticed there's some dark stains on the shirt. At the time, were you, or at any time, I guess, were you able to test for potential blood, see if that was in fact blood?
I did not.
Okay. Would Annie Presley back in your office be someone at that time, be someone who would have tested for possibly suspected blood?
She could have.
Okay. I'm showing you state what's been previously marked for identification purposes, state exhibit 118B. Actually, take a look at that, please.
Okay.
Do you recognize that item?
I do.
What does that item appear to be?
It was a white collared shirt.
And was that collared shirt also found at Jack McLean Park?
It was.
Okay, did you package that in the same manner that you previously talked about, doing the little tags and everything like that?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, this time I move state's exhibit 1, I'm sorry, is it in the same or substantially same condition it was whenever you seized it?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time I move state's exhibit 118B in evidence, please.
It's already in evidence. A through M are in evidence. It's fine.
I'm sorry.
Correct.
No? No, it is not, Your Honor.
No, it's fine.
No, sir, this was not presented to the court for evidence.
Okay. Right, is there objection?
No, Your Honor.
It be admitted?
Thank you, Your Honor. Permission to publish?
You may. What exhibits are you gonna want to admit from 118? We got B through F and M in now. What other exhibits do you want to admit?
Yes, sir. The other exhibits I've got are 118G, H, I, J, K, and L remaining.
Any objection to any of those? They'll be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, both of those shirts that we just showed in A and B, they were found in a trash can, correct?
They were.
Okay. As far as you know, you don't know whether they have any relations at all to the homicide that occurred 6 days earlier, do you?
No.
Showing you the exhibits we just discussed, G, H, I, J, K, and L. Actually, take a look at those items, please.
Okay.
As it relates to item G, what is it that is contained in that package?
Here, it says gloves.
And where were those gloves found?
These were also found at Jack McLean Park, I believe in a trash can.
H,
H is a glove.
again, where was that found?
They were also found in a trash can at Jack McLean Park.
What about J, K, and L?
They're also gloves, also
Oh.
found at Jack McLean Park in a trash can.
Oh. How about the gloves?
Cross,
No problem.
hey, Jerry, I have a question of this witness. All right, if not, you can step down. Do we need to keep her any further?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you're,
I would ask to keep her under the rule. And
all right, remain under rule. You'll be subject to recall. Defense will contact you if they need to. Next witness.
Your Honor, this time state would call Joellen Brown. One moment to give this evidence.
Somebody need to get her.
Your Honor, may I approach so I can switch the,
What's that?
can I approach so I can switch the projector over?
Okay.
Thank you. Nope, excuse me.
Up here, please, ma'am. You face the clerk and be sworn to God.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat, please, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jurors?
My name is Joellen Brown, and I have been a senior crime laboratory analyst at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Excuse me. I retired in December of 2015.
As a lab analyst at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, what were your duties?
I worked in the DNA biology section, and items of evidence that were submitted for cases I would examine and look for bodily fluids such as blood, semen, and saliva. And if I found them, I would do DNA typing in order to try to determine who they came from. I also could test for the wearer of items by swabbing off epithelial cells.
Okay. And I assume that you had some sort of specialized training and experience that allowed you to do that.
Yes, I have a master's degree from Ohio State University in pathology, but I also trained at FDLE specifically to do this job for 13 months and have worked there for 19 years until I retired.
Okay. And when you say you train, do you take specialized classes? What kind of classes are we talking about?
Yes, the training involved a lot of readings, a lot of actual written tests, and also working with the evidence and learning how to do all the procedures.
Okay, and have you previously testified as it relates to DNA comparisons and analysis?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
About 80 times.
Okay, Your Honor, this time I tender the witness.
Any more IRS, Ms. Brown? No, Your Honor. You may proceed.
Now, you mentioned you do testing for DNA and as other biological material. How do you go about doing that in a situation, let's say you have a swab?
If I have a swab, well, first of all, if it has any red-brown staining on it, I would test it for blood. If it is a swab that doesn't have any visible staining on it, I would just cut a little piece of the swab. I would do a chemical test that would extract out the DNA from the cells. Then we do a procedure called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, which basically is like a molecular Xerox machine, making many, many copies of those pieces of DNA that are in that sample. Then we run that sample.
Let me stop you right there. Why do you do that?
We do that because the amount of DNA in a cell, or a few cells, is just too small to be detected. So we want to make copies of whatever DNA is there in order to be able to detect it.
Okay. What's the next step in your analysis?
We then run that sample through a genetic analyzer. It has been through the process of PCR, those little bits of DNA that we're looking at are labeled with a fluorescent dye. And the genetic analyzer uses a laser to pick up those colors. Each one is a different color. There are 4 different colors. And the laser then prints, or the machine rather, then prints out a little diagram of peaks for us to interpret as to what type of DNA is there. Those peaks look like upside down ice cream cones, little pointy, very pointy, not like mountains, but like ice cream cones.
Okay. You talk about these peaks, and as I understand it, there's essentially 2 peaks per person at each one of the loci or locations. Is that correct?
Yes, in the STR type of analysis that we do for DNA, at that time that I was working on this case, we had 13 markers that we looked at. Now we do 15, and they're soon going to go to 20. But at those 13 loci, you inherit a gene for each one of those genes one from your parents, one from your mother, and one from your father. So each person would have 2, although you may have only 1 peak if you inherit the same type of gene from each parent. And we designate those genes by numbers. So for instance, you could be an 8-10 at a particular locus, or you could be an 8-8 if you got an 8 from your mother and an 8 from your father.
Okay. And did you follow these same kind of procedure? You mentioned earlier that the first thing you do is look if there's a red-brown stain, that you look to see if there's a possibility of blood being present. Okay?
Yes.
And then you said if you don't have blood present, you then start cutting it off the swab and start doing the analysis. What do you do if you have a red-brown stain?
Well, if we have a red-brown stain, we do basically the same analysis, but we do a chemical test to determine if that gives indications of blood. Because something like rust could also be a red-brown stain. Okay.
And then in order to do this analysis, you obviously, and let's talk specifically towards this case, you became involved in the homicide investigation regarding the homicide of Brandy Peters, Javante Segura, and Tanaya Peters, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it's my understanding you received a lot of swabs, and we'll get to those in just a little bit. When you receive a swab from a crime scene in this particular case, let's say, what do you do about going and analyzing that particular swab? You've already talked about the procedures, but how do you go about determining who it may be?
Well, first of all, as I said, we determine if there's any stains. We do chemical tests to decide if there is blood there. If there would be a swab from a sexual assault kit, for instance, we would do a test to see if semen would possibly be there. And once we identify that something's there, we would then cut the swab and do exactly what I had said before. If it is a swab that is something for touch, meaning that if you touch an item, you can leave some cells there, such as a doorknob, there might be no stains at all on that swab, but we know we are testing for touch DNA, so we would just go ahead and cut that swab and do the same procedure for that.
What is touch DNA? What are we talking about there?
When you touch something with your hands, or even if you're wearing clothing, parts of your body that touch your clothing will leave some epithelial cells. Those are kind of cells that are on your skin and line your body. So your body is constantly sloughing off those cells. Therefore, when you touch something, you may leave some cells. But different people leave cells at different rates. So I might be a good shedder of cells, but someone else might be a poor shedder of cells. So whether or not we can actually develop touch DNA from an item is an iffy possibility.
Okay. And the other kind of DNA, as you mentioned, red blood cells and things like that, if there's blood or some other kind of liquid left on the scene from the person that contributed for DNA, would that be a way that you find that DNA comparison?
Yes, blood and saliva are very good indicators of DNA.
Okay. As I understand it, you, in this particular case, you analyzed a whole lot of stuff.
Yes,
And that you're multiple reports, so you did a bunch of different analysis, correct?
yes.
Okay. Would it be helpful for your testimony to the jurors if we had a chart, a color-coded chart that would help depict and explain your testimony as we go through this?
That would probably make it simpler, yes.
And have you reviewed that color-coded chart that we just talked about to make sure the accuracy and it properly reflect your findings?
Yes.
Okay. Let me refer you to the screen up here. Is this the chart we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And you actually have a pointer up there to help throughout the course of this. And over here, I've kind of made a key, if you will, as to the different colors and what they mean. Does that accurately depict what you looked at?
Yes.
Now, as I understand it, the first test that you did,
You gonna make a hard copy of this available? for
I am, Your Honor. I tried to print it out, and unfortunately, we had a little problem with the printer, but I will make a hard copy and submit it into evidence, or into demonstrative aid.
Let's mark this 134 when we get the hard copy. So you're not offering it in evidence, you just want to use it for demonstrative purposes?
Yes, sir.
Defense have objection? No, Your Honor. All right. I still think we should make a copy available for the record. It'll be for identification purposes only. The significance of that to the jury is if it's a demonstrative aid, it does not go back with you during your deliberations. You will not get this chart for your deliberations. We're just going to use it here in the courtroom. May I proceed?
Thank you. Now, Ms. Brown.
Can you see it all right? It'd be better if we didn't turn all the lights off, but can you see it all right? But that, in the back row, can you see it?
Now, Ms. Brown, I notice we have a couple of different color codings here. And the green would be the mixture of the family and things along those lines. How do you go about determining whose DNA it is? We've already talked about your procedure, but you get, in this particular case, you get some buccal swabs that you analyze first and foremost.
Yes. In this case, I was given buccal swabs from the victims of the crime, and I go through the same procedure with them to develop their DNA type. And as I mentioned, a person gets two, we call them alleles. Allele just means what kind of a gene you could get. An 8 or a 10 is an allele. So each person would have one or two peaks. So they would have two alleles, but they might have one or two peaks at each locus. If I have a mixture, that means I will have more than two peaks indicated, and therefore I know that there's more than one person there.
Okay. And you mentioned the two alleles. Did you receive a buccal swab from Brandy Peters?
Yes.
And could you please tell us what the alleles were for Miss Peters at the different locations?
The names of the alleles are kind of long, so in the laboratory we abbreviate them with letter D and a number, and what that indicates is what chromosome those are on.
Okay.
So for Brandy Peters at D3, which is the first one, her type was 1517. At VWA, her type was 1518. At FGA, her type was 2426. Then we have a marker called amylogenin, which indicates the gender of a person. In other words, it can tell if a person has only an X chromosome, or actually two X chromosomes, but only one peak at X. And if the person is a male, they'll have an X, but also a Y chromosome. So for Brandy Peters, her amylogenin type is XX. For D8, her type is 1115. For D21, her type is 2528. For D18, her type is 1719. For D5, her type is 1111. For D13, her type is 1111. For D7, her type is 1112. For D16, her type is 913. For THO1, that's TH01, her type is 77. For TPOX, TPOX, her type is 810. And for CSF, her type is 1114. And those are the 13 markers plus amylogenin. That was a full type for her.
Okay. And what about Javante?
Javante's type at D3 is 1717. At VWA is 1518. At FGA is 2426. At amylogenin, he has a male, so he has an XY. At D8, his type is 1215. At D21, his type is 2528. At D18, his type is 1919. At D5, his type is 1114. At D13, his type is 1112. At D7, his type is 1012. At D16, his type is 1113. At THO1, his type is 78. At TPOX, his type is 89. And at CSF, his type is 1111.
Now, Tamaya and Tanaya, they are twins.
Yes.
What does that do to your DNA analysis as it relates to, I guess, the buccal swab itself?
Well, of course, you could have identical twins or fraternal twins. And when I did the typing on Tamaya and Tanaya, it turns out that they are identical twins. So they have exactly the same DNA type at these 13 markers.
Okay, and what are the markers, the alleles at those markers for Tamaya and Tanaya?
The twins have at D3, 1517, at VW8, 1415, at FGA, 2026, at amylogenin, XX, at D8, 1112, at D21, 2528, at D18, 1718, at D5, 711, at D13, 1112, at D7, 1012, at D16, 1313, at THO1, 78, at TPOX, 8, and at CSF 11.
Okay. And what about Mr. Segura?
Mr. Segura, Henry Segura, at D3, it's type 1717. VWA is 1518. FGA is 2124. Amylogenin is XY. D8 is 1216. D21 is 28 and 32.2. D18 is 1819. D5 is 1214. D13 is 1212. D7 is 1010. D16 is 1113. THO1 is 78. TPOX is 99. And CSF is 1111.
So what you do, if I understand you correctly, is you take those numbers and you develop certain swabs that were taken from the scene, and then you'll develop, I guess, peaks as it relates to the swab from the scene, and then compare them to see if those alleles are present at the proper locations.
Yes, whatever DNA type I got from the evidentiary material, I would then compare it to these victims' types. Most of the items came from their house, and especially if they were touch DNA, I would expect them to have one or more people from the occupants of the house on those kinds of items.
Okay. If we can refer to the chart, let's start, if we can go through these. What I see here is on the first line, which would be 103A, States Exhibit 103A, D, C, D, E, F, through M, that these all appear to be swabbings or scrapings that were taken off of Brandy Peters. Did you do a comparison or do you analysis based upon those items?
Yes, 1 through 10 were scrapings from her fingernails. I'm sorry, 103A through 103J. I used 1 through 10 as the FDLE number, that's what I was referring to. And at all 10 of these, Brandy Peters type was found, which of course is normal. The green indicates that there was nothing foreign to her. The yellow indicates that there was some unknown alleles showing up.
Okay. When you say there was some unknown allele showing up, what does that mean?
That means there would be an allele showing up that's not hers. And in the cases of these 3 areas that are yellow, there was no indication of a Y, so there was not male DNA there. So I concluded that the foreign type was female, since there was no male there.
Okay. And these are all fingernails that we're talking about that have the yellow, so we're talking about States Exhibit 103C, 103H, and 103I, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. As you make your analysis, are there different levels of these peaks that help you with your analysis or tell you how much DNA there is there, essentially?
Yes, the height of the peak tells you how much DNA is present. Oftentimes we can see in a mixture that there's a major component, in other words, the peaks are higher for that person, and there might be a minor component where the peaks are lower. There could be one or more minor components.
Okay. Do you have a specific term you use for that, I guess, frequency or the height of those peaks?
The unit, kind of like inches, if you were measuring with a ruler, is called RFUs, or relative fluorescent units. And as I mentioned before in PCR, these 13 areas are labeled with a fluorescent dye. So the laser picks up the fluorescence from these dyes. So their measurement unit is RFUs, or relative fluorescent units.
Is there a significance as it relates to the RFU number when you're performing your analysis in order to do a comparison for inclusion and exclusion?
Yes, at the time, in 2010 and 2011, when I was working on this case, the standard operating procedure for FDLE stated that between 50 and 100, we would call those star alleles, if that's all the taller they were. And what that meant was we couldn't be sure if we saw just one allele there, was that a homozygote, meaning it has two alleles of the same type, as before I gave you the example of 8-8. We couldn't be sure if that was 8-8, or was it an 8 and then the other allele that went along with it might have dropped out. Dropping out means there's just not enough DNA there to show us a peak. So therefore, we could not use the starred alleles between 50 and 100 to do any statistics to include a person. And we could exclude a person, however. So let's say if I had an 8 and a 10, both of which were starred, if I had a person whose type was 8-10, I could not say that they were included, even though it looks like they might have contributed something there, because I was not allowed to do statistics for a starred allele. And it was required that we had to have statistics in order for it to give some weight to how likely this is that person. So therefore, we could use starred alleles to say someone was excluded. If someone's type was 11-12, but my starred alleles were 8 and 10, then I could say that that person was excluded. But I could not say if a person was 8 and 10 that yes, they are included there, because I could not give a statistic based upon our standard operating procedures.
I guess is the scientific reason behind not doing an inclusion in that range that we just talked about for a star allele, what would that be? Why is that you wouldn't be able to do that?
That's, as I said before, we could not be sure that if I had a single allele, such as an 8, was that person's type really an 8-8, or was it an 8 something else and the other one just dropped out because there was not enough DNA. 50 to 100 RFUs is very low. The normal range for our calling is from 50 to like 8,000. And for a good profile, big strong profile, you would have RFUs in the hundreds. So 50 to 100 is pretty low.
Okay. So because the DNA, there's so little there, it makes it difficult to make a determination who it actually belongs to, but you can actually exclude somebody if something, allele is there that shouldn't be.
If the person has an allele that's not present, like if a person's 11-12 and the starred alleles are 8 and 10, I know that that person could not have donated that. But if a person is an 8 and 10, I really can't say if the 8 and the 10 is from them, or if it may be from two different people and the other alleles have just dropped out. So that's why, scientifically, it's not a good idea to do statistics on those.
Okay. As it relates to these particular items we're talking about here, with the RFU numbers, are they of the numbers that you would be able to make an inclusionary term, or can you only use it for, are they star alleles you can only use for exclusion?
Well, on Exhibit 48, at D3, there was a 15-17 from Brandy Peters, but there was also a 16 present. That was not a star. Then at CSF, there was an 11-14 that would have been from Brandy Peters, but there was a starred allele. So technically, I could do a statistic on D3.
Okay. But you've got star alleles otherwise, and at this point, it's an unknown female who, that secondary mixture is, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And same with 103H and 103I, we're talking about an unknown female mixture, correct?
Yes, it was the same kind of situation with Exhibit 53, which is 103H for the court.
Okay.
There was a 16 at D3 and a star. at 16, or at D3. There was another allele at FGA that was not starred. There was another allele at D8 that was not starred.
As it relates to DNA that's being left at a particular location, your analysis can make a determination that DNA is there, correct?
Correct.
Can you make any determination about when DNA is left?
No.
Okay. Why would that be?
DNA can last for a long time. For instance, in the laboratory, when we have standards that we want to keep, we dry it out on a little piece of cloth, and we can keep it in the freezer for years. However, under different circumstances in the environment, if an item was out in the woods, let's say in the summer in Florida, when there's lots of heat, which degrades DNA, and even dirt will degrade DNA because there are enzymes and organisms in dirt. So it all depends upon the environmental situation.
Okay. As it relates to these particular items, there's no way to tell whether or not this is something that happened on scene or whether it's something that would have been maybe your nail technician or something along those lines that left that DNA.
That's correct.
Okay. We can move on to NOP, 103 NOP. That appears to be additional items that were scrapings or swabbing from Brandy Peters that did not have any foreign DNA. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. As it relates to 103 R, S, and T, those are purple, and I believe that means that they are not analyzed. Is that correct?
I looked at the item, but in terms of doing DNA analysis, each one of those was hairs from Brandy Peters' fingers, and there were no roots on those hairs. Therefore, I could not analyze them. For hairs, to do DNA analysis, you must have a root.
Okay. And why is that?
For the type of DNA testing that we do, which is nuclear DNA testing, only the cells in the root have nuclei that have viable DNA in it.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to State's Exhibit 81, 82, 90, and 35. These are red coded. What does that indicate? That Brandy Peters' DNA was present?
Yes.
Okay. And then I note that there's something here that says it's a mixture with an unknown male and unknown female as it relates to each one of those items. Could you tell us about that, please?
Yes. Item 81,
So you've got the numbers not showing numbers.
There we go.
item 81, which is a swab of the interior front door handle, was a mixture. Brandy was the major component, and it was a mixture because there was a Y chromosome indicated, but only a Y. There was nothing else. So therefore, I'd have to say that unknown person is male, but I don't have any other information on that person. For 82,
Wait, let me stop you right there. What do you mean you don't have any other additional information on that person?
there's no other alleles that I could use to make a call.
Okay, so you know that it was a male, so you have the XY chromosomes, but there's nothing else there for to say who it was.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, next.
82, which was the swab of the interior deadbolt area of the front door, was a mixture of Brandy and the twins' DNA. But there were some unknown alleles there, and there was no indication of a Y, so I called that an unknown female.
Okay. Next.
And number 90, which was a swab of the interior deadbolt area of the front door. I think actually 90 is the exterior. It says interior here, but I think it actually is the exterior. This was a mixture also of Brandy and the twins. And again, there was an indication of a Y, so there was an unknown male. I didn't have enough information to say. It could have been Javante, I can't say.
Okay. So the only thing you know is that that was a male, possibly even Javante.
Yes.
Okay. Next.
Exhibit 35, is that what you're referring to?
I think it's going to be FDLE. I think we're next. We're on. Yes, Exhibit 35, FDLE 33, Swab of phone cradle.
On the swab of this phone cradle, there was a mixture, including an unknown male, but it did have enough DNA that I could search the unknown type in CODIS, which is,
Well, let's not talk about CODIS, okay?
okay.
Let's talk about, at this particular time, we have this exhibit, and as relates to your test back on December of 2011, what was your finding on that particular date? As I understand it, there was presence of at least 2 individuals.
Let me find my report for that one.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yes, this mixture there was Exhibit 33 from TPD, it's Exhibit 35 for the court. It was a swab of the side of the phone cradle. It demonstrated the presence of at least 2 individuals, at least 2. And if I would assume that there were only 2, I did have a complete DNA profile for the major contributor and a partial DNA profile for the minor. Complete means I have all 13 markers. Partial means I have less than 13. And the major DNA profile matched Brandy Peters. And the results for the minor donor were consistent with coming from a male individual.
Okay. And it's my understanding at that point, you determined that Tamaya, Tanaya, and Javante were excluded as possible contributors to the DNA profile that time, correct?
Well, actually, when you're dealing with mixtures of family members, it makes it a little more difficult to interpret. So I did interpret that as 2 people and that the children were excluded. However, on looking at it more carefully, I thought, oh, well.
All right, well, let's do this one first, and we'll get to your subsequent analysis, because I know that came out at a later time.
Okay.
All right. I'm not trying to cut you off. I just want to go by date, so that way we kind of keep this structured a little bit, okay? All right, so as it relates to 34, which is State's Exhibit 36, swab of the handset piece of phone. As I understand it, what were your results on that one?
There were at least 3 individuals indicated. And you would know that there were at least 3 because there would be 5 or more alleles at some of those loci.
Okay, back me up a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, as we discussed, if it's a single person, there's 1 or 2 peaks. If there are possibly 2 people, you would find 3 or 4 peaks because they might be different from each other. And then if you have a third person, that's usually indicated by having more than 4 peaks, if they're not related,
Okay.
anyway.
So then, as I understand this one, then we've got more than 4 peaks, and that's an indicator there's a possible third donor.
Correct.
Okay, and what was your finding, if anything, as it relates to that third donor?
Brandy, Tamaya, and Tanaya, and Javante were all included as possible contributors to the mixed DNA profile, but there were indications of an additional contributor to the mixture.
Okay. And that's the handset of the phone, correct?
Correct.
Okay. State's Exhibit 44, what was your finding as it relates to the master door handle there, the master bedroom door handle?
That was a mixed DNA profile from the swab of the exterior master bathroom door handle, which demonstrated, again, at least 3 individuals. And I could not determine major or minor components for those. But Brandy, Tamaya, Tanaya, and Javante are all included as possible contributors to that.
Okay. So essentially, we're consistent with the family members here, correct?
Correct.
All right. As it relates to item number 45, which is TBD number 36.
That was a swab of the exterior toilet room door handle. That indicated the presence of at least 4 individuals. And I could not determine the profiles for major and minor contributors. Again, Brandy, Tamaya, Tanaya, and Javante are all included as possible contributors to that mixture. And if I assume the presence of all 4 of the victims, there's indications of at least 2 additional contributors to the mixture.
Okay. And let me pause you right there. At one point, we were talking about comparisons when you have 2 persons and they figure out who was the minor and the major. And obviously, you'd have 2 peaks, I think is what you said, was significantly higher than other ones, so you could tell they were the minors and majors, correct?
Correct.
As it relates to this one, you said you could not consider, you couldn't figure out who it was that was the major and the minor. Why would that be?
Because a lot of the peaks were about the same size. And also, since there's so many people in this mixture, we don't know who's sharing what with whom. When we're talking about a mother and her children, if there's a mixture of a mother and 1 child, you would only have, because they share 1 peak, these are mom's peaks and these are child's peaks. The child inherited 1 of those peaks from the mother. So there would only be a maximum of 3 peaks. And in some cases, the child might have exactly the same type as the mother, and there might be only 2 peaks. So when we're talking about a mixture of a mother and a child, instead of the usual situation where there would be at least 4 peaks, or 3 or 4 peaks at all loci, instead, with the children, there's no more than 3 peaks. So when I included Brandy and all of the children, Tamaya and Tanaya have exactly the same DNA type. Javante is a little different. So it's possible with a mother and 2 children that have 2 different types, there might be 4 peaks. And so, but that would be the maximum. In some of the cases, in some of the loci for this particular exhibit, there were more than 4. So I knew that there were more than just the family members. There were some DNA alleles that were foreign to the family members.
Okay. And then exhibit 111, 110, 131, 112, 113, and 114. Those are all buccal swabs of each one of those individuals that you use for comparison purposes, correct?
That's correct.
And as I understand green, it means you found no foreign material in those buccal swabs, which is to be expected, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, if we can real quick, as to 45, which would be TPD Exhibit 36, is my understanding at a later time you received some other buccal swab for possible comparisons?
Yes.
Okay. And one of those buccal swabs, or 2 of those buccal swabs, was Mary Richard Williams and Cassandra Williams. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And did you go back and compare that with that exhibit to find out where they were possible donors?
Yes, I was given buccal swabs from many different people who might have visited the home, and even police officers, to make sure that they did not leave their DNA there. And I compared all of those profiles that I developed to these mixtures. And in this particular mixture, which was states 45, the exterior toilet room door handle, I could exclude everyone except for Mary Rashad Williams and Kishandra Williams.
Okay.
They had some alleles that would have been included in that mixture.
And you don't know who these people are as they relate to anybody. That would have to be an investigator that talks to who, as Mary Rashad Williams, Cassandra Williams are, correct?
I don't know who they are, no.
Okay, fair enough. Whenever you did the comparison, and I noticed that Henry Segura and Tony Anthony, of course, the children are there, were you able to determine paternity for Tamaya and Tanaya Peters?
Yes, Antonio Anthony is the father of Tamaya and Tanaya.
Okay. And as it relates to Javante Segura, were you able to determine paternity there?
Yes, Henry Segura is the father of Javante Segura.
So as I understand, all your testing on December 3rd of 2010, with the unknown male, you were able to exclude Mr. Segura as on Exhibit 72 and 7, I'm sorry, on, you excluded him on the phone, the toilet, and of course the female DNA from the fingerprints, correct?
Yes,
Okay. But you could not exclude him on 72 and 74, which is the front door handle and deadbolt, correct?
for Exhibit 74, which is, states 90, I could not make any conclusion about the male contributor.
Correct.
Just to say that there was a foreign male contributor.
Okay. And the same with 73, correct?
Do you
Or
mean
72, excuse me,
72?
72.
Right, I got no results obtained for the minor donor except for amylogenin, which is consistent with a male. So I had no information on which to make any kind of conclusions.
Okay. Let's move on to the January 31st report, please.
If this is a stopping point, Mr. Chief, maybe
Yes.
take 10 minutes here.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Grable. All right, let the jury step out. Take 10 minutes. Either side need anything?
No, sir.
All right, we'll be in recess. All right, everybody be seated, please. May proceed, Mr. Chief.
Thank you. We can now turn to your report dated January 31st of 2011.
Okay.
Okay. Looks like a whole lot of stuff was analyzed at this particular time. Is that correct?
Yes, this is a culmination of a lot of testing. Yes.
Well, let me ask you a question. Why is it that there's some stuff tested on December 3rd, there's some stuff tested on January 31st, and multiple different times? Why would that be?
These dates are just the dates of my report.
Okay.
From the time that the crime occurred, I was working pretty constantly on analyzing things every day.
Okay. Is there any kind of rules or anything that regulates the number of items that Tallahassee Police Department or any other agency for that matter can submit at certain times, or how you go about choosing what to analyze and in what order?
At that time, there were no rules that said multiple things could not be determined. How I determined to test things is I pretty much tested everything.
Okay.
There might be a few things that were left out. For instance, the victim's clothes did not need to be tested if they were all bloody. We know that victims, if they were bleeding, that was their blood.
Okay. Well, that brings up a good point. As it relates to the victim's blood being on their on the clothes, is it possible for, obviously in this particular case, I'm talking about Brandy Peters, had very extensive injuries and there's a lot of blood involved. Is there a situation where essentially her blood could, I guess, wash out other DNAs or overpower DNAs and things along those lines?
Yes, especially if we're talking about one person's touch DNA and the other person's bleeding. We get DNA much more easily, and there's a lot more of it from blood. Very little DNA from touch.
Okay. So it's possible essentially that it would overpower at that point for many to touch DNA from Mrs. Peters because of the amount of blood she had.
If we had someone touched an area and then she bled on it, that's correct.
Okay, all right. So let's talk if we can, let's move through this. State's Exhibit number 9, which is Tallahassee Police Department number 1. Well, let me show you another question. When it talks about the analysis, do you ever talk to law enforcement or work with law enforcement in going through things that may be more likely to show DNA to help you, or do you just, in this particular case, analyze everything?
Sometimes we do talk to law enforcement,
Okay,
yes.
Did you do so in this case?
I don't recall.
Okay, fair enough, long time ago.
Right.
Okay. All right, so let's go to State's Exhibit 9, which is TPD 1. What was your finding as it relates to that?
This red color is indicating that that is Brandy Peters type. From all these exhibits that are colored red, I either got a complete type, a partial type, or a major type, and all of them matched Brandy.
Okay. And so let's go, so we're talking about number 9, 10, 11, 18, 19, 20, and 53. All of those were consistent with just being Brandy Peters with no mixtures found, correct?
I will have to check. Yes, there was either complete, partial, or major DNA profile. When I say major, that was indicate that there was a mixture.
Okay. And I believe as it relates to 23, you actually found a mixture there, is that not correct? Which is State's Exhibit 54?
On,
And I think those are mislabeled. I think that's supposed to actually be Exhibit number 22 and 23. You found a mixture, is that correct?
by TPD's number 22 and 23, yes, there was a mixture.
And then, so in State's Exhibit number 53, which is TPD 22, and State's Exhibit 54, TPD 23, you found a mixture, so these two actually should be moved up, correct?
Well, there were indications of an additional contributor, yes.
What does that mean, there are indications of an additional contributor?
That means that Brandy Peters was a major component, but there were some other little alleles showing up, so I have to say that there's an indication that there's another contributor. However, it was not enough to call it a partial.
Okay, and that was my next question, is that's a different explanation than we've previously heard. Previously, we've heard possible unknown male, possible unknown female, and then we've heard, as it relates to the bone cradle, additional minor contributor. What is the difference between what we previously heard and this as it relates to a possible contributor?
Basically, that means that all of the foreign alleles are between 50 and 100, so I cannot call it a type. That would be those starred alleles again.
Okay, so what we're talking about is there's evidence of something's there, but you can't make any kind of determination at all.
Correct.
And in this particular case, as it relates to 22 and 23, am I correct in saying that you couldn't even make a determination whether it's male or female contribution?
I believe that is correct. Yes.
We're talking about 22 and 23 here. States Exhibit 53 and 54. correct?
Yes, I think on the right-hand side where it says possible mixture for,
It should be up here.
it should be up there, yes.
Yes, okay. All right. All right, so if we can move on to 55, State's Exhibit number 55, 56, 21, 22, 29, 23, 37, 73, 74, and 75. All of those are same, consistent with Brandy Peters being the major donor, or the donor, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And again, we're continuing through 76, through 76, 77, 92, 91, 93, which are all these are swabbings from inside the home as well. All right, those are all consistent once again with Brandy Peters being the donor.
Well, State's Exhibit 76, which was TPD 71, which is a shovel. I actually did 7 different swabbings from that shovel, at different areas of the shovel. 3 of those fit into this category. The other 4 are different.
Okay. What is different about the other 4?
I'll have to talk about them individually.
Okay. I think I've got them on the chart later on, but we can go ahead and talk to them since you brought it up.
Okay, so area 4, the data is insufficient for inclusion purposes, but results are consistent with originating from a female individual. Tamaya and Tanaya and Javante are all excluded as contributors to these DNA results, and no determination can be made about the possible contribution of Brandy to these results.
Okay. So you've excluded Tamaya, Tanaya, and Javante, but you could not exclude Brandy as being the possible contributor as the female donor, correct?
Correct. That means that the alleles that were showing up were starred alleles.
Okay. What's next?
Area 5, and this is from the back of the shovel, the shaft of the shovel, demonstrated the presence of at least 2 individuals, and assuming 2 donors, a complete DNA profile for the major and DNA results for the minor could be determined. The major matches Brandy, but the results for the minor contributor are consistent with originating from a male individual. And I have excluded all the other standards that I had as being the contributor to this DNA profile.
Okay. And that DNA profile, or is that based upon, as we previously heard, starred alleles, but you have a XY chromosomes?
There is a Y, yes.
Okay. So we know it's a male, but we don't have anything else for, everything else, all the other alleles will be a star. Is that my understanding of your testimony?
Correct.
All right. Next spot on the, I think we have 2 more spots to go on the shovel.
I think those are in another report.
Okay. All right. Then we'll get to those shortly.
Okay.
All right. So 103V, 103HH, and 103W were swabs from nail clippings and swabs from Brandy Peters. Moving on to states 58, 59, 60, 72, and 68. Those appear to be 58 would be a swab of the common bathroom. What were your results as it relates to those?
All of those exhibits gave the profile of Tamaya and Tanaya.
Okay. At the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. What steps are taken to ensure that whenever you do your DNA analysis for that projectile, that it's not contaminated in any way, shape, or form by the analysis that's doing the projectile?
The policy at FDLE is if there's a projectile involved that needs to go to firearms, DNA is always done first. So I swab the whole thing And that does not interfere with the firearms examination.
So you swab it and then send it on to firearms, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And what were your results as it relates to 49, 50, and 71?
I did not get any DNA results on those.
All right. Let's talk about 27, 76, 69, and 46. And one of those would be the swab of the hall light switch and swab of the master bathroom faucet handle.
Which one is which?
76, 69, and 46.
Okay.
What is your results there?
I got no results from those items.
Now, on these two, you're talking about a swab of the hall bath light and the swab of the master bathroom faucet. Fair to say those are pretty common things that somebody would touch or utilize. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. But you didn't find any DNA?
Not that I could use. Correct.
Okay. We already talked a little bit about this, but why is it that, I mean, something as common as these two things may not have any DNA on them?
Well, for one thing, people shed DNA at different rates. And if it's possible that a person who doesn't shed much DNA was the last person to touch, like the light switch, they may have rubbed off other people's DNA. As
Okay.
long as there was no blood on them, we would be assuming that we were just testing for epithelial cells from touch.
Okay. So is it fair to say that just because there's no DNA present doesn't mean that somebody wasn't there and somebody didn't touch it?
Correct.
Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, essentially. Is that correct?
I would say that's
Okay.
true.
All right. Exhibit number 17. Which is a swab of blood on the floor in the hallway, front of the bathroom. What was your results there?
Tanai and Tamaya were the major contributors. The minor could not be determined, but I was able to exclude all the samples that I had gotten.
Okay. When you say, and we've heard this a couple of times, and I think we've already covered it, but when you say Tamaya, Tanaya, it's because they're twins. You can't say both of, you're not saying both of them, you just can't tell the difference between the two, correct?
Even if both of them had contributed DNA, the profile would look like one person.
Exhibit number 26, another projectile.
I got limited DNA results for this item, but I was able to exclude all that I had swaps from.
Okay. And then 34, Stacy exhibit 34, which is TBD 32, the swab of the phone cord. What were your results there?
Tanai and Tamai were the major contributors. I could not determine the minor component. In other words, any minors were starred alleles again, but I could exclude everyone that I had swaps from.
Okay. And then 76, this is the shovel that we've previously gone over, correct?
That's correct.
All right. What about Stacy exhibit number 41, TBD item number 121, cigarette button ashtray in the master bedroom?
The major contributor was from Brandy, and there was a partial minor contributor that was consistent with a male.
Okay. And as I understand, I think we already talked about this, you later on got some other DNA. Did you make any findings as it results to an individual by the name of Jeremy Smith? And I believe that would have been in June 9th.
Yes, I got buccal swabs from Jeremy Smith and analyzed them as usual. When I compared his type to the minor donor from that exhibit, he was included as a minor contributor.
Okay. And Stacy exhibit number, and again, you don't know who Jeremy Smith is, you just know that that's something you looked at, correct?
I don't know who he is.
Okay. 61, 63, and 64, what were your results there?
63, I had DNA results which were foreign to the victims, but I had no determination for Henry Segura.
Okay.
64, Tanaya and Tamai were the major, and the minor results were limited again.
Okay.
And 61 was just a mixture of all the victims.
Okay. All right. Go one more. I think we had 65 still.
Oh, 65,
Yes, 65.
that was the swab of the toilet flush handle. I had limited results, could not make any determinations there.
Okay, again, very common thing, place that people utilize, no determination, no DNA was sufficient for determination purposes, correct?
Correct.
66, this is a swab of suspected blood on the back of the tub wall. What were your results there?
Brandy Peters was the major, and the minor could not be determined.
Okay. Again, startle alleles for the minor.
Correct.
And 67, 96, and 47.
67 was a mixture of Brandy and Tanaya Tamaya. 96 was the twins and Javante included, plus an additional contributor. And 47 was Tanaya Tamaya plus another male, and Javante was excluded.
Okay. And as it relates to 96, possible mixture, were you able to make any kind of determination about male, female, or was there insufficient data to give you those?
It was insufficient.
Okay. And as it relates to 47, did you go back and test that against that Buccal swab with Jeremy Smith as well?
You're talking about which one?
I think 47, Stacy did 47, TPD 135.
Yes, I did.
Okay. And your results there?
He was included as a possible donor to the mixture.
Okay. Next, let's talk about, it's actually supposed to be labeled as State's Exhibit 103 HH, which is the sexual assault kit that was taken from Brandy Peters. Did you analyze that?
I did not analyze it for DNA, but I did do an examination for semen.
Okay. And what does that mean?
Well, for a sexual assault kit, that's pretty much what you're looking for, is semen. And I did not find any on the buccal swabs, vaginal swabs, oral swabs, or anal swabs.
Okay. And the reason you look, why would you look for semen versus just doing a DNA analysis?
Well, there will be a lot of DNA from the victim on all these swabs because they were taken from her body. There's no need to do DNA unless we know that there's something foreign there, which would be the semen.
Okay. So essentially you're looking to see if there's, again, a bodily fluid or something that was deposited that may have DNA from somebody else.
Correct.
Okay. In this particular case, you found no evidence of that, so you didn't do any further analysis.
That's correct.
Okay. Item number 13, 14, 15, 16, 30, 33, 42, 25, and 39. Did you do analysis on those items?
These were all tested for blood, and there was none, so no DNA analysis was done.
Okay. Again, you're looking for some sort of bodily fluid that would have been deposited, and because there was none, you didn't do a front analysis, correct?
Well, let me just look at these. 13, 14, 15, and 16 were swabs that were supposed to be suspected blood. Those were the ones that I did phenolphthalein testing for blood, and there was none.
What is I'm sorry, I missed that.
Phenolphthalein,
Can you spell that for Madam Recorder, please?
PHENOPHTHALEIN.
All right. What is that?
That is a chemical that if blood is present and you drop it on a sample, it will turn pink.
Okay. I assume it reacts to the blood in some way, shape, or form?
Yes, it's reacting to the hemoglobin in the blood.
Okay. And for those that don't know, including me, what is hemoglobin?
Hemoglobin is the substance that makes your blood red. Has iron in it. If you're iron deficient, your hemoglobin is deficient.
All right, so that's 13, 14, 15, and 16. What about 30, 33, 42, 25, and 39?
If they had suspected blood, I tested them for blood and they were negative. There was, number 30 was a silver-colored bracelet from the master bedroom floor. I did not examine that. Which number did you stop with?
I had it in my head now, I forgot. 39 was the last one.
39 were letters from a TV stand in the master bedroom. I did not examine those.
Again, 103BB, 103U, 103Q, Y, Z, GG, YX, excuse me, and Z. Again, not analyzed.
Correct.
B, 103AA, these are all projectiles that came out of Brandy Peters. They were not analyzed, I assume, because they were in her and would have her DNA.
Well, 103AA is from Tamaya.
I'm sorry, Tamaya, yes, ma'am.
Right, I did not analyze those.
Okay. Stacy, 24, 78, 48, 96, 99, and 103CC. Again, no analysis was done.
Correct.
You checked with blood, but possibly, but there was nothing really.
Did you mention 96?
No, but I will now. 96.
Oh, 96 is not in, should not be there because it was examined.
It was.
Yes.
Okay. Then let's take a look at Stacy Exhibit 96 and 133. What was your finding as it relates to that?
There was a mixed DNA profile from the swab of the kitchen phone plug inserted into the wall that demonstrated at least 2 individuals, and the DNA profiles for the major and minor could not be determined. Javante, Tamaya, Tanaya are included as possible contributors. There's indications of an additional contributor to the mixture, but Brandy and the other swabs that I had received are all excluded as contributors to this mixed DNA profile.
Okay. What about 99, 103CC, 103DD, 103EE, 103FF, 87, and 100? It appears, well, first of all, let's talk about 99. Disposable camera on a kitchen counter. Was that analyzed?
No.
Any particular reason behind that?
No?
Okay. 103CC, 103DD, 103EE, and 103FF appear to be clothing and or the wig that Ms. Peters was wearing at the time. Is there a reason why those were not analyzed?
Yes, they were blood-soaked, and we didn't need to identify her blood. Yes, they were blood-soaked, and we didn't need to identify her blood on them. If there had been some areas where there was no blood and we could have tested for someone touching the clothes, we would have, but there was not.
Again, we're talking about a situation, I think we already covered this, regarding her blood basically would have drowned out any other DNA.
Correct.
potentially. 87 and 100, we're talking about paperwork, and I guess in the hair. On 87, we're talking about hair. Was that analyzed?
Which TPD number is it?
TPD 141.
No.
Is there, why would that one not have been analyzed?
I believe the hairs were not analyzed because it was assumed they would be from people in the house.
Okay. So this one wasn't analyzed, it's not from the same thing we talked about earlier, where there's no root or anything along those lines, there was not an analysis done.
I did not, I did not look at it.
All right, and then the last two we have is 100 and 101, miscellaneous paperwork and trash bags. Those were not analyzed?
That's correct.
Okay. If I can, go back to State's Exhibit number 72, which is Tallahassee Police Department number 45. Talk about this. A swab of suspected blood from the lower middle cushion in the living room. Swab of the couch cushion.
Okay.
Did you test that for the presence of blood?
No. Let me refer to my notes, please.
Let's talk about the we talk about the DNA. Did you test this for DNA?
I did test exhibit, TPD Exhibit 45 for blood. It was positive.
And whose DNA was that?
Tanai and Tamai is who it matched.
Move on to your June 9th report, please. And I believe we talked a little bit about this report already, where there were multiple swabs from different persons that you used for comparison purposes. But specifically, if I can refer to you, State Exhibit number 32, which is Tallahassee Police Department number 12, a purse that was found on the master bedroom floor. What was your result of the analysis for that?
I took multiple samples from Exhibit 12. I took a sample from the zipper and pull tab area, the handles, and the bottom and sides.
Okay. If you can, walk us through that analysis, please.
Well, this is a purse, and I tried to imagine where would people be touching it. Obviously, a woman would be holding the handles. If it had a zipper, she would be pulling on the zipper pull. And then just the outside of the purse in general. If someone, I believe this purse had been dumped out on the bed, if someone did that, they might have picked it up by the bottom and shaken the things out. So I tested all three of these areas separately to see what I would get.
Okay. And what were the results of those three areas?
The first area, which was the zipper and the pull tab area, gave a full profile which matched Brandy Peters.
Okay. What about the other two?
Okay, area 2, which was from the handles, gave a partial DNA profile, which matched Brandy Peters, but there was also the possibility of an additional contributor to the DNA profile. I did not get any results for this additional contributor with the exception of amylogenin, which indicated that that was a male.
Okay. And again, all you can tell us is a male, but there's nothing for inclusion purposes, or even exclusion purposes, a start allele.
There was nothing else but amylogenin.
Okay. And, I'm sorry, did you already cover the third spot?
No.
Okay.
From the sample from the bottom and the sides of the purse demonstrated at least 3 individuals. Brandy, Peters, and Javante Segura were included as possible contributors. And there are indications of an additional contributor to the DNA profile, but they were limited results and the data was insufficient for inclusion, so that they were start alleles again. However, I was able to exclude all the other swabs from standards of the people that I had received, including Tamaya and Tanaya were excluded.
All right. And I believe you did a report on July 15th, and that was the one where you went back and compared Ms. Mary Richard, there's nothing there, and Ms. Mary Richard Williams as well as Yashondra Williams, and we previously talked about that, correct?
Yes, that was the report in which I had received buccal swabs from 7 different people. Were you talking about the July 15th report?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I think you switched back on what we're showing up there, Mr. Pugh.
Yes, sir, there's no actual diagram that goes with July 15th report because it was just additional. My understanding is essentially it was additional buccal swab that you went back and compared previous items with, correct?
Correct.
Essentially, as I understand your analysis, Ms. Brown, is essentially inconclusive. You had a lot of possible mixtures and things along those lines. You can relate, am I correct in that?
I don't think I would use the word inconclusive.
Okay, how would you describe it?
I would use inconclusive if I couldn't make any kind of conclusions at all.
Okay.
I made a lot of different conclusions, including, Brandy Peters type at various areas in the house. and also the children. And then there were some foreign DNA types. There were some partial DNA types. I was able to make a conclusion that I believe it was Jeremy Smith was included on a cigarette butt in the bedroom. And then there were some very minor foreign donors. So there were foreign donors there.
Fair enough. As it relates to those foreign donors, they were, I guess, the start alleles you previously talked about. So they're not for purposes that you can go back and later do inclusion when statistical comparisons, correct?
No, and that's not true of all of them. That's true of a lot of them, but there are some that could be, conclusions could be made. Inclusion statistics could be done.
Okay. Again, we've also talked about DNA, and the fact that you can't tell when it's there and when it was deposited, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that, and I think we kind of covered this about the DNA as far as to telling when it can be deposited. I know we already talked extensively about the blood can possibly wash out, especially with Brandy Peters and her injuries. What factors are there as it relates to what would cause DNA to degrade or remain for extended period of times? What kind of factors are we talking about?
Well, as I said before, if a sample is outside in the heat, heat can degrade DNA. If it's gotten dirty, dirt can degrade DNA. Chemicals can degrade DNA. That's why if there's a blood stain somewhere you want to get out, you might use bleach, and bleach will definitely degrade DNA. But other conditions might be favorable to preserving DNA. For instance, cooling in a refrigerator or a freezer can preserve DNA.
Air-conditioned house, better than outside, would fair say, then, right?
I would say in an air-conditioned house, DNA would be pretty well preserved.
One more, Aaron?
Cross.
One more, Your Honor.
I'm sorry.
No other question.
Cross.
Yes, sir. Actually, may we approach, Your Honor?
Okay, let's go sidebar, please. All right, let the record reflect jury's out of the courtroom. Why don't we take a proffer of what it is you want to ask, Mr. Prince?
Yes, sir. Ms. Brown, at some point during the course of the analysis, as it relates to TPD Exhibit 24 FDLE Exhibit 33, the swab of the phone cradle, which you recall we've previously discussed at evidentiary hearings, you at some point during the course of that analysis developed an investigative lead, correct?
Yes,
And based on the development of that investigative lead, the normal process would have been for you to request Buccal standards for the particular individual who you believe there was an investigative lead for, correct?
yes,
To do a match report for the agency who submitted the evidentiary exhibit to you for analysis.
correct,
And of course, also you would notify the state attorney during the course of the pending litigation, correct?
yes,
In this case, however, after developing that investigative lead, you were prevented from first requesting the standards, correct?
correct,
You were also prevented from notifying the submitting agency and the state attorney, which was a violation not on your part, but was a violation of FDLE policy requiring disclosure of those types of investigative leads, correct?
yes.
No further questions.
Want to cross on the subject?
Eventually, you did tell
Yes,
state attorney's office,
yes,
and eventually, I don't know whether you were still there or not, but eventually did get the DNA for that particular individual. Do you know anything about that?
no,
Okay. The information that this investigative lead, we're talking about the CODIS system, correct?
yes,
Okay. So you upload stuff onto CODIS, and any kind of return that comes back is based upon what they're telling you, what CODIS tells you.
correct.
Okay, they give you a report and a letter.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. I see the matches that come back. I look through them. If they're a very strong match, I contact the agency that has that sample and ask them for a confirmation. Then they send me a letter of confirmation. If it is not a good profile, sometimes there's more than one return, and I have to go through and decide which ones are a good match, or if there's more than one good match, and ask those agencies for confirmation. And then I get a confirmation letter.
And when you say you get the information back from that agency, they submit you the DNA profile of that CODIS hit, correct?
No, they
Or the
just
allele
say
numbers?
that they have confirmed the match, and then they give me the name. At the time that the match occurs, I don't know the name.
Okay. So how is it you go back and look at and verify whether it's a good match or not? I don't understand.
The match report that I got from CODIS would show my sample and the sample that it matched to. And then I can look in my file and see if that person, if it's a person that it matches to. It could also be a sample. If there are any indications in my profile that I was not able to upload to CODIS, for instance, that would indicate that that person was definitely included, or there might be an area where they had alleles that were not included in a mixture. Usually this is a mixture that we're talking about.
All right. And so in this particular case, you got the match back, the alleles that are in that match, correct?
Correct.
And you have no way of verifying where those alleles in that match came from.
I'm not sure I understand.
You don't know where it came from. You weren't part of the agency that originally collected it and submitted it into the computer and all that stuff, correct?
Well, the information that I have is that this was from a convicted offender, and then it tells me the agency. In this case, it was the FBI.
Okay. Again, you weren't part of that analysis, correct?
I did not type that person, no.
Okay. And you have no way of verifying that analysis and that name and everything is the person that's in question, correct?
That is up to the agency that put in the sample in the first place, which would have been the FBI.
All right. Thank you.
Any further on that, Mr. Prince?
No, just argument, Your Honor.
Let's be clear for the record. You used a TPD number and FDLE number. What I want is the court exhibit number. Is this 35? Is that what we're talking about? State's Exhibit 35? I forget what numbers you used, Mr. Prince.
It is State's Exhibit 35.
You said, did you say FTLE 24 and TPD 33? Is that what you said?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. FDLE 24, TPD 33.
All right, so State's Exhibit 35 is
Correct.
what we're talking about.
Yes.
Ms. Brown, all right. All right. So, Mr. Prince, why is that relevant?
Well, for a number of reasons. There was additional DNA analysis done by other investigators, other analysts who disagreed with Analyst Brown's findings to the extent that they're going to testify, and I don't know for certain whether the state intends to call them. I guess the easiest way for me to say this is that it's part of the overall narrative that the defense intends to present, which is that law enforcement had a particular perspective on the direction of this investigation. The fact that in violation of FDLE policy, a senior analyst was prevented from reporting a match, which would have been compliant with FDLE policy, doing a match report, which would have been compliant with FDLE policy, and requesting Buccal standards, which would have been in compliance with FDLE policy, is relevant to the jury's analysis of the investigation as a whole.
Let me clarify something with the witness. Did anyone outside of FTLE have any involvement in this process of disagreeing with your proceeding forward?
No.
That was internal of FTLE? Yes. She's trying to get.
Oh, yes.
I see you nodding your head. So, okay. Right. So it's internal to FTLE. So how do we put that on State Attorney's Office or Tallahassee Police Department to the extent that's what you're suggesting?
I'm not suggesting that we put it on the State Attorney's Office or the Tallahassee Police Department in particular. I think it just shows the overall tone of the investigation, and perhaps more important than showing the overall tone of the investigation, I think it would aid the jury in understanding how it was that when we have DNA which matches another individual involved in this narrative, the defense narrative of the case, how it was that person was not earlier identified as a suspect and investigated. That's something that I imagine if that testimony is before them, they'll want to know is how is it that this person was not investigated earlier, and that goes to explaining why that person was not investigated earlier, because the DNA match was buried.
It doesn't, because Tallahassee Police Department had no knowledge of this analysis for whatever reason, and had they done so, and in fact when they were became aware, it was gone and gotten, and he was in fact investigated. So it's going to confuse the issue there, and doesn't do exactly what it is Mr. Prince is trying to put it forth to do. And in fact, it's the exact opposite as it relates to that. Again, this is all, everything about this match calls for hearsay, and there's no authenticational aspects. That's why the CODIS hits aren't allowed in a courtroom proceeding. In this particular case, just to call an investigative lead instead of a CODIS hit doesn't change the nature of it. All we're doing is doing semantics and changing the name. So instead of calling it CODIS, we're calling it an investigative lead. It's still a CODIS hit, and there's a reason long-standing as to why they're not admissible in the court. In addition to that, once again, this is all, as the court pointed out, it's an internal thing. It wasn't as if this was told to Tallahassee Police Department and they buried it, as Mr. Prince is trying to put forth. That's just not the situation, and it would create a falsity in the juror's mind.
Further, Mr. Prince?
Just very briefly, Your Honor, I don't want to belabor the point. We're not trying to introduce it for hearsay purposes. We're not trying to use it to corroborate our own DNA analyst comparison of the match. That's why I'm not asking to be able to say that statistics were done or that the CODIS system said that the suspect was Antonio Angel Avila. It's just that I want to be able to show why, in particular, a suspect identified as an investigative lead was not investigated during the time when Mr. Segura was being identified. Why Mr. Segura was identified as the primary suspect during the early stages of the case. It's because the Tallahassee Police Department did not receive evidence relevant to their investigation because of an FDLE breach of protocol.
I must sustain the objection. It seems to me as very slight probative value and is going to cause a great deal of confusion. Basically, what will then get off on a rabbit trail of what is FDLE's internal policies and why do they have those policies, and are the policies right or wrong, which has nothing to do with what we need to determine in the trial. It also puts us into what is CODIS, and I've already ruled that CODIS has not been shown to be scientifically reliable, so it's not admissible, but it's going to throw that into the mix. Ultimately, the actual examinations that were done can be presented to the jury. I have not prohibited that, and I think the defense has testimony that they're going to present on that issue, and we're going to go directly to the analysis without the confusion mixed in. I would have a different posture if somehow or other the police department or the state attorney's office had some involvement in making this determination, but from the testimony presented, that is not the case. So I'm going to sustain the objection. Are you going to have other cross of Ms. Brown?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's have a jury back, please.
Before we bring them back, can we change that so that I can show them?
You want the display up there?
Yes, sir.
I see you want me to do the trial.
I didn't know you'd undone. I thought it was just a matter of.
confused.
Your Honor, just for the record, co-counsel is asking to make the following point.
Everybody be seated. You may proceed, Mr. Prince.
Thank you, Your Honor. Analyst Brown, I want to clarify a few things about what your role was at FDLE. You said you had testified as an expert in approximately 80 cases or so as of the time of your involvement in this case, correct?
Correct.
But testifying in court is only part of your job. You develop evidence on thousands and thousands and thousands of probably uncountable evidentiary exhibits. Is that right?
Yes.
And the state of Florida routinely throughout your long career relied on your expertise and testimony in building their own cases and convicting people charged with criminal offenses, correct?
Yes.
And I think that was made clear as well, but you were employed full-time. It's not like you were an independent contractor by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask you a few general questions about interpretation of data. Can you tell the jury first what a kit is?
A kit is just a box of chemicals produced by some company that enables us to do the DNA analysis. So for instance, in this case, I used two kits. They were called Profiler and Cofiler. And we use those together. Together, those two kits give us the 13 loci. In 2012, which was after this case, FDLE changed to a different kit called Identifiler, which gave 15 loci. So it's just basically the chemicals that you need to do the DNA analysis.
And in order to interpret DNA results using those kits, interpretive guidelines are developed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for use specifically with those kits, correct?
Yes, we go through a process of validation using the kits to determine what are the limits. Like, for instance, I was mentioning the starred alleles. At that point in time, between 50 and 100 were considered not reliable in terms of is that a homozygote or a heterozygote allele, and how high we can go for the RFUs and how low we can go. And below 50 we know is not reliable because there's electronic data that gives little blips that are not peaks So validation is done and interpretation guidelines are formed.
And validation is not something that's imparted kind of willy-nilly. It's an extensive testing process to make sure the interpretive guidelines for that kit work best with that kit, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It takes months to do a validation.
And likewise, you can't just mix and match interpretive guidelines with different kits. You mentioned, for example, the Identifiler Plus and Minifiler kits. You can't just take the Cofiler and Profiler interpretive guidelines and use those guidelines to interpret data from some other kit's results, right?
That's correct. Each kit has to be validated by itself, and the interpretation guidelines are specific for those kits.
And the reason for that is that it wouldn't be scientifically reliable to use interpretive guidelines not validated for use with a particular kit, correct?
That's correct.
Another general topic I want to ask you about is blind testing. Explain what that is and why that's important for the objectivity and reliability of a DNA analyst's findings.
I'm not sure what you mean by blind testing, actually.
Well, I'm probably using the wrong term because I'm not a scientist, but not being told a story about the case, not communicating directly with the investigator about his ideas or notions on who a suspect is. Why is that important to a DNA analyst's findings?
Well, a DNA analyst has to be impartial because we can't, like, look for someone's DNA. So I guess maybe that's what you mean. In fact, when we do the testing, if at all possible, we test all the items of evidence before we test the standards of the people, and we interpret whatever kind of results we get on the evidence, and then later we compare to the standards to see if they fit into that particular interpretation of a mixture, for instance.
And that's what you did in this case, right? You started developing all of the profiles from the evidentiary exhibits before you did any comparison to standards that you would develop for known individuals, correct?
Well, with my first report, by that time I had done the standards for the victims of the crime, and I think two other individuals, Mr. Segura and Mr. Anthony. I did have those, but you don't compare those to your evidentiary samples until you're finally done with that particular sample.
And as you mentioned before, that's to prevent contamination of your own interpretive process, right?
Right.
Okay. One more additional point I wanted to clarify in general. There was some discussion of sexual assault kits, and you also mentioned when talking about blood covering touch DNA, would the DNA you would expect to extract from vaginal fluid or a vaginal swab, for example, have the same sort of overwhelming effect on touch DNA potentially present in the same swab? Is that question clear?
Yes, that is true, because when you do swabs from a victim, whether they're vaginal swabs or whatever kind of swabs, you're getting a lot of DNA from that victim. And if you were looking to see just who might have touched that victim at that spot, it's most likely that you would get a lot of DNA from the victim and maybe none from the person who touched because of the overwhelming amount of DNA from the victim.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit too about the phrase exclusion and what that means. We heard Mr. Fuchs say, whereas the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, evidence of exclusion is in fact evidence of that person's DNA, correct? Being gone, not being a part of the mixture, I mean.
It would be evidence that the person's DNA is not part of a mixture, correct?
And so that's not simply saying that their DNA is absent. It's saying there is DNA to compare it to, and that person is scientifically eliminated as a possible contributor to that particular mixture if they're excluded.
That's correct.
Okay. I'm sorry that I can't refer to the state's exhibit numbers, but I want to ask you about a couple particular exhibits that you analyzed, and I'll use the TPD and FDLE number, and ask you specifically about Mr. Segura's exclusion from those.
So we need to use the exhibits according to the Branson, and we can use both, but we need at least according to this.
I'll try to pause them after each question, Your Honor, to get on the same page about which state exhibit number it is. The first that I want to ask you about is, let me see here. FDLE exhibit number 3, TPD exhibit number 48. This is a scraping from Brandy Peters' right middle fingernail. Do you have the report there where you analyzed that?
Yes,
And that was found to be foreign female DNA, correct?
State exhibit is that?
FDLE 3 is 103C.
Okay. State exhibit 103C. Repeat your question, Mr. Prince.
Yes, sir. Analyst Brown, you were able to identify foreign female DNA at one marker there, is that correct, at D3?
correct,
And based on the particular genetic numbers present at that marker, you were able to exclude the other known contributors, correct?
correct.
Okay. With respect to FDLE exhibit number 8, TPD exhibit number 53, scraping of Brandy Peters' left middle fingernail,
Which appears to be 103H.
103H. Likewise, you were able to identify foreign female DNA at 3 separate markers, D3, FGA, and D8. Is that correct?
Correct,
Excluding other known contributors.
yes,
Likewise, at FDLE 9, TPD 54, scraping of Brandy Peters' left ring finger under the fingernail,
Which appears to be 103I.
103I, State's Exhibit. Again, you were able to identify foreign female DNA at D3, excluding other known contributors, correct?
correct.
All right. I want to talk to you a little bit about the swab of the phone cord, not the phone cradle yet, but the phone cord, FDLE 23, TPD 32.
Would be 23 and 32. is what I'm
Yes, sir. FDLE 23, TPD 32.
saying. State exhibit 34.
State's Exhibit 34. Again, that's the swab of the end of the phone cord. You were able to identify at least 3 donors to the mixture there, correct?
Yes,
And it might be worth pausing at this point to explain. There are different criteria for saying for certain how many donors there are to a mixture, right?
that's correct.
And so to say that it's a 3-person mixture, what are the guidelines that you use to be able to say that definitively?
Well, in this case, they were a little different than normal. I think I explained before that if you have 3 people in a mixture and each person is getting an allele from their mother and their father, there's potentially up to 6 alleles that can be at a locus if you have 3 people. However, if you're dealing with a mother and her children, the mother and a child, a mixture of 2 people, will have only, the maximum number they can have is 3, because the mother and the child will be sharing 1. Then if you have a third person, the mother, the child, and a third person, it's possible there's only going to be 4 alleles in a mixture, because 3 will be from the mother and child, and the 4th one may be from the third person. So even though it might look like a mixture of only 2 people, it could possibly be 3 people if we're talking about a mother and a child.
I guess generally speaking, though, to be able to say that it is a 3-person mixture, there are certain criteria, right?
If it is not, if they're not related people.
And then there would likewise be a separate set of criteria to say that it's a 4-person mixture, right?
Well, basically, it's the minimum number of alleles that you would see.
Okay. The point of me asking you questions, the question I want to get to is, there is some room, some gray area between it being identified definitively as a 3-person donor and a 4-person donor. In other words, you can have 3 clearly identified with evidence of contamination or contribution from some potential 4th donor without it meeting the criteria to say it is a 4-person donor, correct? 4 people have donated to the mixture.
Your Honor, I'm gonna object to that question. It seems to be confusing when watching Ms. Brown's reaction to that, so
I think that's up to the witness, but if she doesn't,
Well, if I understand the question correctly,
well, let's not guess. If it's unclear to you, just tell us that, please.
could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. I just want to clarify that while there are certain guidelines for calling, let's make it 2 and 3, for example. While there are guidelines for saying this is a 2-person mixture, and then there are guidelines for saying this is a 3-person mixture, it can be a 2-person mixture that doesn't meet the criteria for identification as a 3-person mixture, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be evidence of contribution by 3 people to what you identify as a 2-donor mixture, correct?
Yes, that's correct, because our language that we use is this is a mixture of at least 2 people. If people share alleles, which many people do, a 3-person mixture could look like a 2-person mixture.
With respect to the evidentiary exhibit that we were just speaking about, FDLE 23, TPD 32, and the court's already read the state exhibit number for that one, you were able to identify at least 3 donors, correct?
I said that the twins, Brandy and Javante, were included in the mixture, yes.
And the twins were the major profile, is that right?
Yes, the major DNA profile matched the DNA from Tamaya and Tanaya.
And to be clear, this is the cord that goes with FDLE exhibit number 24, TPD number 33, which is the phone cradle.
Which is state's exhibit 35.
Yes, it was identified as the swab of the end area of the phone cord, number 13. And I believe
Okay.
the phone cradle was considered number 13.
And then with respect to the exhibit we were talking about, 23, FDLE 23, TPD 32, Henry Segura was specifically excluded as being a possible contributor to that mixture, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, moving on to State's Exhibit 35, which is FDLE 24, TPD 33. You have your findings relative to that exhibit before you there?
Yes, that was the swab of the side of the phone cradle.
All right. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
And just for identification, this will be listed as defense composite exhibit 1A and 1B.
Yes.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Is that the electropharogram that you developed in testing the DNA from that evidentiary exhibit?
Yes, it is.
Does it appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you obtained the results and made your notes?
Yes.
Your Honor, for efficiency's sake, I would request at this time to move into evidence what's been pre-marked for identification only as defense composite exhibit 1A and 1B into evidence as defense composite exhibit 1A and 1B and request permission to publish to the jury.
Is there objection?
Can we go sidebar briefly, please?
Go. as discussed at sidebar, I'll admit Defense Exhibit 1A and B.
May I publish to the jury?
Yes, you may. Yeah, I'm in a second making that.
Analyst Brown, what is this that we're looking at?
This is the kind of printout we get from the DNA analyzer. It's called an electropherogram, or E-gram. And this shows you the peaks at the different loci.
And this may be a very simplistic way of describing it, but we've probably at all some point seen a cartoon of a DNA character that looks kind of like a ladder. These individual markers right here indicated by boxes, are those like the individual prongs of the ladder?
No, not really.
Okay, you did the explanation now.
It'd help if you slid that up to make it a little higher up. It might be, I mean, not all of it, yeah, just so. Is it focused?
Could it be enlarged a
That's
little?
what I'm working on.
Oh, there we go.
Better? Yes, thank you. Just explain then as simply as you can, because obviously even after discussing this over and over, I still don't know how to articulate clearly
No,
what
I guess
are
it's
these
fine.
individual markers that we're looking at right there.
Okay, each one of these bars here, there's one that's the D3S1578 marker, or I called them a loci. There are 13 of them. This is one. This is another one. Oops, right there. This one is a large one. It goes all the way there. So there's 3 markers there. Then this is the amylogenin marker. You see there's a big X right there, and there's a smaller Y. So that indicates, notice how small the Y is. That indicates that there's a mixture of female and male DNA. If it was just male DNA, the Y would be about the same size as the X. Then here is another marker, and another marker. So there's 3 markers there. And actually each one of these comes out as a different color. This is blue, this is green, this one is yellow. From the machine, we don't see it in color when it's printed out. Then here are 3 more markers, one here, and one here. And that's a total of 9 markers, but the other markers are on another page from the other kit. This kit here is representing these 9 markers, which is Profiler Plus, is the name of this kit.
Okay, and then I see these peaks or ice cream cones as you described it before at each one of those markers. Are those what you were describing before as the individual genetic numbers at
Yes.
each marker?
Yes.
Okay.
Each one of these areas has multiple numbers of alleles that it could be. Some of them range from 5 to 20, for instance. And you asked me what each one of these loci was in your big long string of DNA, which is millions of base pairs long. We can identify these individual areas on your genome, on your chromosomes. And when this says D3, that means it's on chromosome 3. When this one says D8, it's on chromosome 8. Some of them have odd names like VWA and FGA, but those are on chromosomes as well. And this is just a long strand of DNA, and these particular ones are called STRs, or short tandem repeats. And if this says 15 and 17, what that means is there's 15 repeats of a certain piece of DNA, and these happen to be 4 letters long. Well, they're not letters, they're bases, but we abbreviate the bases as A, C, T, and G. So there might be AATC or AGCT or any kind of combination. So this person from their mother or father got a 15, and from their mother or father got a 17, which combined gives them the type of 1517.
Okay. If this were, or we don't even have to talk in particular about this exhibit, but if you have a perfect 2-donor mixture you're going to have 4 allele present, even if they're, the same number twice, because they got the same number from both parents. But you're going to have 4 present genetic markers at each one of those locus. Is that correct?
You might not be able to see them as 4. Like, for instance, this is a mixture. If they share alleles, then you will not see 4. In fact, you could possibly only see 1 if the 2 people are homozygous, like 8-8, and both of them are 8-8. You would see only a peak of 8. I mean, there would only be 1 peak, which was 8. So when you say that you need to see 4 alleles from a 2-person mixture, that means out of all the 13, it's likely that you'll get 4 somewhere. But that's not necessarily so. You'd be anywhere from 1 to 4.
Because there could be overlapping numbers, as you've indicated.
They could be sharing alleles,
Sharing.
That's correct.
And there would tend to be, if it's a good sample, meaning that there are good quantities of DNA from both donors, you would, for example, if they were all sharing 1 allele number, you would expect to see that allele be a really high RFU, a really high quantitative number, correct?
Compared to the rest, yes.
Right, okay. In this case, however, we're dealing with a sample that isn't especially high, but high enough still to do interpretation. Is that correct?
This is a touch DNA sample, and so, yes, a lot of the peaks are not very high.
Okay. And just to be clear about what you were saying before, regarding starred allele, using the interpretive guidelines validated for profiler and co-filer, you're allowed to use starred allele to exclude somebody from a mixture, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You just can't do statistical inclusion unless it's above 100, right?
That's correct.
And that's to make sure that your findings are not being influenced improperly by white noise in the instrument, correct? Or
Correct.
some other contaminant, right?
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to ask you about a couple of those things, those general topics that the jury might need to know about to understand why you interpreted the electropharogram in this manner. Tell us what white noise is, for example.
If you go down below 50 RFUs, since this is electronic data, you will see little bumpy peaks below 50. And during the validation process, it's determined how low you can go, basically, and not have any interference from those white noise peaks. So in this case, 50 was the cutoff point.
Another topic that probably needs explanation is drop-off or dropout. What does that mean, and how does it occur with a sample like this?
When you have very low levels of DNA, sometimes you will not be able to see a second peak. I can't see a very good example of it up there. But for instance, a person could be a 10-12, could be their type. If it's very, very low, like between 50 and 100, you might see the 10 and not the 12, because there's just wasn't enough of the 12 to be amplified and show up on this type of electropharogram.
Okay, and then the last thing before we get into your findings here that I want to ask about is, what happens to the DNA quantity as we're going from the left side of the electrophorograms that we're looking here to the right side?
Well, you can see it kind of decreases. The X is very tall, then this is smaller. These are about the same size, and then out here, you can hardly see them at all. They're very small, only 138, 79, and is that 184. That just is because of the fact that out here, these alleles are larger alleles, actually, in terms of how long they are. And when DNA degrades, as all DNA will degrade a little bit, the bigger pieces degrade faster than the smaller pieces.
And that will result sometimes in, for example, I see down at the bottom there, D7 on the bottom right.
I think
see
it's
that one?
obscured for me anyway by the evidence.
Slide the sheet up a little higher.
Yes, you can see right here for D7, there's nothing showing up right there.
And that's as a result of what you talked about, it being a larger allele, a larger locus where.
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to ask you specifically about Can you show the jury what you were looking at, how that was relevant to your interpretive process, and what your ultimate findings were with respect to each locus?
When I first looked at the mixture, it appeared that there were no more than 4 alleles at all of the loci. Like, for instance, here's an example where there are 4 alleles. Some there are only 2, and there's no example of only 1. But that told me if I was going to see any minor people showing up, they would show up at this area from here to here, because these are the smallest pieces of DNA, so they would tend to be preserved the most. And if there's a minor component dropping out, then we might get out here and see nothing or very little. So when I first looked at this, it looked like it was a 2-person mixture. Obviously, you can tell that there are some alleles that are much larger than the small alleles. So that would be who would be a major component. So I therefore wrote on there major 15, 17, minor inconclusive, because I can't tell. It doesn't look like there are any minor alleles. A minor allele could be a 15, a 17. It could have dropped out, but I would expect it to be there. Here, again, it looks like a 2-person mixture, because it looks like 15, 18, I think that is major, and these 2 smaller ones would be minor. And out here at FGA, again, there's 2 pretty large ones, even though this one is kind of small compared to that one, but you would expect that in a touch DNA sample when you're talking about the larger loci. And then there's teeny tiny ones, 21, which is only 50 RFUs, and 25, which is only 60 RFUs. So that I considered to be the minor component.
Okay, so at FGA then, we would have a genotype for the minor contributor, a clear identifiable genotype, is that right?
It would be 21, 25, however, they are starred alleles.
So we would be able to exclude a known sample against that, but we couldn't do statistical inclusion on those.
We could not do inclusion, but we could exclude, correct.
Okay. Going back to VWA, the middle marker on the top row there for a minute, is that the one where ultimately you judged the 14 to be a stutter and not an allele, evidence perhaps of potential contribution by a third donor, such as one of the twins?
Well, let me explain what stutter is. In front of each of these big alleles, there will be a small peak that is exactly 1 repeat smaller. And that is a known effect. We know that that's there. Let's see. I'm not sure I can find you a good example of that. These are bigger than stutter because the machine that analyzes these is set to cut out stutter. It's about 11% of this large peak will be the stutter peak. And that one, 134, is more than 11% of 624. So therefore, if there is some stutter there, there's also some contribution by another person's DNA.
And so on a peak like that, an effect like stutter can stack on top of DNA that is really there, but perhaps below usable limits to make what looks like an identifiable allele. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in this case, based on its positioning, you decided not to call 14 an allele, right?
Well, I decided that's not exactly true. When I looked at the entire, you have to look at the big picture. When I looked at the entire picture of the profile, I saw that down here, there was a 7 allele. There's a large 11, it looks like an 11-11 homozygote, and then it looks like a 7 and a 12. However, it turns out that the girls, Tanaya and Tamaya, have a 7 allele. And it turns out it's a rather rare allele. there's different percentages for each population or each ethnicity, and for African Americans, which they are, it's less than 1% of people have a 7 allele. So I thought that was probably indicative of the fact that since this is touch DNA from a telephone that children would probably be touching in their mother's bedroom, that it's possible that at a very, very low level, these girls were included.
So I guess I said that wrong. We know that the girls are excluded from being the minor contributor to this mixture, right?
I could not say that they were included because everything that might have been from them was a star allele. So
And-
therefore, I cannot say they are included.
Right. But you were able to say that, I know that there's, as we talked about before, room between it being a 2-person mixture and being a 3-person mixture, as clearly identified, that there can be a 2-person mixture with evidence of contribution by a third. You were able to exclude the girls, the twins, from being the minor contributor, but you did find evidence of their contribution to this mixture, correct?
Well, once I saw what their types were and realized that certainly children could be touching the phone in their mother's bedroom, I realized that some of their alleles may be showing up. Like this 14, they have a 14, and they have a 7.
And that was a logical conclusion when looking at your other analysis, for example, because we know that they were the major contributor to the phone cord, which was attached to this evidentiary exhibit, right?
I didn't actually use that logic, but it is logical. What I used was the fact that I had analyzed a lot of different mixtures in this household from touch DNA, and most of the time, if there was not blood involved, it was a mixture between the mother and one or more of her children. And so this made perfect sense logically to me that it's possible, especially with this, can't get my pointer to it, this 7 showing up, that these girls' DNA is probably here.
If you would have ever had an opportunity to compare a known standard to the minor contributor here, you wouldn't have used, because you didn't identify those as alleles of the minor contributor, based on the explanation you just gave, you wouldn't have used that 7 and 14, would you?
I could not use the 7 if I was doing a comparison. This thing doesn't work. Oh, yeah. Because it's a starred allele. But no, I would use the 14. And the reason is I would do a mixture calculation, which is different from doing a single person calculation. What that means is I would include 14, 15, 17, and 18 all in the calculation to say who could have contributed to those 4 alleles. And
I see.
And the same thing is true at D8. There's only 3 alleles, but I could use these because they're all above 100. I could use these because they're all above 100. And I think I could not do it here because the minor was inconclusive, so I would not want to do it there. It could have dropped out.
I see. So that's a scientifically reliable method of doing inclusion to the mixture as a whole, correct?
When you do statistics, to just say inclusion to the mixture of a whole, yes.
Okay. And with respect to this, the manner that you've described, hypothetically, doing inclusion statistics for this particular example, that would be the broadest way to do inclusion, correct? You would expect the most people to be included doing it that way, right?
Yes.
Okay. I interrupted you with questions, but you can continue with your findings and let us know what you interpreted each of the rest of the locus starting in the second row.
All right, I want to just be clear that when I realized that it could be a mother and a child included in this mixture, I tried to find what was foreign to them. So even though this says major and minor here, the most important thing is what's foreign to them. So up here at VWA, the 17 is foreign to them because At VWA, Brandy is 1518, and that fits with the major component. Tamaya is 1415. Tamaya and Tanaya are 1415. And Javante is 1518, if he was even included there. So just taking all those into consideration, the 17 is foreign. So that is what I would use to find out who the foreign person is.
And then the same thing at FGA, going along the top road to the right, 21 and 25 were both foreign, correct?
That's correct. Brandy is 2426, which matches with the major. Tamaya and Tanaya are 2026, and a 20 is not even showing up there, which means that their contribution has dropped out. And Javante is 2426. He happens to have the same type as his mother. So yes, 21 and 25 would be foreign to all four of the victims. So that is what I felt was significant there.
Okay. How about for amylogenin on the second row down?
So amylogenin obviously shows that there's a major component that is female, XX, and then there's a minor component that is male. Could that be Javante? Could be, but he is not showing up in all of the other loci, so I don't think it is him. I think the foreign person is male. Then for D8, which is this one, 1115 seems to be the major, and then there is a 12 present. And the types of the victims at D8 are 1115 for Brandy, 1112 for the girls, and 1215 for Javante. And although the 12 is also found in the children, it also could possibly be from that male third donor. And so, again, there are 4 alleles here, and if this was just a mother and her child, there would only be 3.
Right. And part of the reason with respect to D8, for example, that you're able or willing to identify the 12 as potentially being foreign is because of the proportional values of the DNA present at that marker. Would that be correct? Is that one of the factors that you look at to say, yeah, that's probably foreign and not some evidence of contribution in low levels from the girls or Javante?
Well, I wouldn't at this point, no.
What is it that allows you to say that 12 is probably foreign then?
It could be from the children. I don't know that.
Again, then you're just doing it in the most inclusive method possible to try and sweep in as many people as possible
If
for.
I could do statistics on this locus, and I would include all of those alleles, 11, 12, and 15, in
Okay.
doing the statistics.
Okay. How about for D21 then?
Okay, D21 is 2528, and it turns out that all 4 of the victims are 2528. So I can't differentiate whether the children are there or not. And there is nothing that's showing up here that's foreign.
Okay. How about for D18? Any evidence of foreign contribution there?
Brandy is 1719, the girls are 1718, and Javante is 1919. So the major is 1719. Again, this 18 is possibly from the girls. But I can't do statistics on this locus anyway because it is a starred allele at 18.
You would only be able to use that for exclusion purposes.
Correct.
Okay. What about down at, is it D5 on the bottom left there?
Yes. At D5, Brandy,
Yes, sir.
Brandy's type at D5 is 1111, and so it corresponds with the major. The girls are 711, and that was the clue that I thought probably indicated that they were there. and Javante is 12-15. And there's no 15 showing up, but there is a 12 showing up. I really think that Javante is not in this mixture. So therefore, this 12 is foreign to the girls and Brandy.
Okay. And then how about at D13? Is there evidence of potential foreign donor there?
No, because Brandy is 11-11. The girls are 11-12, and so is Javante. So this might be from the foreign person, but I don't know. And I cannot use it for statistics. Or I can use it for statistics. Yeah, that's 123.
You would be able to use that one because it's a 123.
Yes,
Okay.
I could use that one for statistics.
Okay, so that one could be from either the girls or a potential foreign donor.
Correct.
And if you had a sample to compare it against, you would be able to do inclusion statistics for the profile of the
Correct.
known foreign donor at that point. Okay.
If a person had 11-11, 12-12, or 11-12, they would be included there.
Okay. I'm going to show you now the second part of the defense in positive exhibit 1. The co-filer part of the results you obtained for this evidentiary exhibit, is that right?
Yes. I should say that there are two loci between profiler, this is co-filer. Between profiler plus and co-filer, there's D3 is found in both of them, and D7 is found in both of them. Those redundant loci kind of is a check to see, to make sure that you put the same DNA in both of those reactions, because they're separate reactions. And for this D3, we get exactly the same thing that we got from the profiler plus, which is a good thing. It's 15-17. So anyone included in there has to be 15-17, 15-15, or 17-17. It turns out that the Brandy and the girls are 15-17, and Javante is 17-17. So that, and whoever is the foreign contributor has to be one of those three types, 15-15, 17-17, or 15-17, because I would not expect the foreign donor to have dropped out over here on this side.
Okay. And how about for D18? Or
You
is that
mean D16?
Sorry.
Okay, the major component is 9-13, and that is Brandy's type. The girls are 13-13, and Javante's 11-13. But I don't think that he is in this mixture, so therefore the 11 is foreign. So what we would say is it's 11 plus. What that means is the foreign person has an 11, and what is their second allele? We don't know, because this one is so low that its other allele could have dropped out. And there is a way to do statistics. If I could have used this, I could have done statistics, but since that's a star, I cannot.
Okay. Same result on amylogenin down in the next row is with profiler?
Yes, it is given the same.
Okay. THO, that's one that we didn't look at on profiler, right?
Right, this one is only in co-filer. Here, the major seems to be 7-7, and that corresponds to Brandy's type. The girls are 7-8, and also Javante is 7-8. So 9 is definitely foreign to them. I wasn't sure if this 8 is represented by the girls or the foreign type. So therefore, I would call the 8-9 both foreign. However, I cannot do statistics on this one either because the 9 is a star.
Okay. What's the next one? Is it TPOX?
Yes, TPOX. The major component is 8-10, and Brandy's type is 8-10. The minor is 9, and the girl's type is 8-8. Javante is 8-9, but I don't think that he is there. So I would say that the 9 is foreign.
Okay. And
Then it's CSF. They're getting pretty small now, but still 11-14 are major, and that is Brandy's type. The girls are 11-11, and Javante is also 11-11. And so the minor is inconclusive. I didn't see anything that was foreign to them, so I would not call a minor.
Okay.
That's also way over here on the right-hand side where it may have dropped out.
I understand. And were you able to make any findings with respect to D7 at the bottom?
Yes, if you could move it up, please.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, the major peaks here are 11 and 12, and that corresponds to Brandy's type. There's a 10, and the girls are 10 and 12, and Javante's 10 and 12. So it's really inconclusive there. The minor, the 10 might be from the minor donor, or it could be from the girls. I couldn't say, but I can't use these for statistics anyway, since the 8, or the 10 rather, is a star.
Okay. I guess the takeaway question from that I would have, just to clarify and summarize, is first, there is evidence of contribution by more than 2 people, in your opinion.
Yes, considering that the mother and child probably contributed to the mixture.
And if you were to do inclusion comparison, or comparison for purposes of inclusion, statistical inclusion in the mixture, you would have looked at all of the numbers, correct? All of the allele numbers present in the mixture.
For making a judgment as to whether a person is included, I would, but for statistics, there were only 2 areas that I could use for statistics.
Okay. And the fact that there are, because we have at least 3 people contributing to the mixture here, the fact that allele numbers are present that don't match a particular person doesn't necessarily exclude them from the mixture, correct? Does that make sense?
Could you ask that again?
Yes, because this is kind of a messy mixture where it looks like the girls are probably contributing as well, but it also looks like there's a foreign contributor. With the fact that numbers are present that don't match a known foreign sample, if you were doing a comparison, necessarily exclude that foreign donor?
If their alleles had dropped out, no.
Okay. And there was evidence of dropout in looking at the sample, right?
The foreign donor, which was evident at VWA, is very low. So yes, I would think that their alleles may have dropped out.
Okay. All right. I want to move on and ask you briefly about some other items.
Much longer, Brent?
We could take a break. I don't know exactly.
Let's go ahead and take a lunch break. Let's, don't discuss the case among yourselves. Anyone else? Be back ready to go 1:15. Stay in session for just a moment. You were not able to hear our conversation at sidebar, Barbara, we're redacting the bottom part of Defense Exhibit 1A. Mr. Brent's going to get with her and make sure that's done. So just put that part in evidence. You'll just take the bottom part off. All right? Either side, anything further? No. Mr. Brent, you were trying to say something earlier, just as the jury came in. Mr. Cummings was wanting you to do something, I don't know.
Yes, sir. He was wanting me to preserve for the record regarding the objection that we made, or I guess it was the state's objection, but regarding the argument we made at sidebar about being allowed to get into the fact that she was prevented from notifying the submitting agency. Mr. Cummings wanted to make the point that the state had to some extent opened the door by asking a question which required a response relative to CODIS during the direct examination, and that we should have, based on that, been able to go into that.
I don't believe that's the case. So anyway, one very brief mention, he quickly moved away from that. I don't think the door's been open. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, see y'all at 1:15. Somebody was gonna make me copies of the emails and the letters that we discussed Friday. You gonna do that, Mr. Brent?
I will. Do you want those prior to the Wednesday hearing, Your Honor?